Silence fell over the courtroom, heavy and suffocating, as Judge Miller slowly adjusted his glasses. He looked from the trembling woman in the cheap, worn coat, clutching two terrified children, to the impeccably dressed man and his mistress smirking at the defense table. Everyone expected a standard custody ruling a wealthy father, reclaiming his heirs from a destitute mother. But when the judge picked up the sealed DNA envelope and the trust deed, his expression turned to ice. "Mr. Remington," the judge's voice boomed, "you claim these children are your only hope for the inheritance. But this document proves you have been living a lie for 6 years." What happened next didn't just silence the room. It made the mistress scream in a way that haunts witnesses to this day. Snow battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, but the chill inside the room was far worse than the blizzard raging over Manhattan. Sarah Remington stood by the marble fireplace, her hands trembling as they rested on her stomach. She hadn't told him yet. She had been waiting for the right moment, perhaps over the dinner she had spent 3 hours preparing a roast chicken with rosemary, his favorite. But Richard hadn't looked at the dinner. He hadn't even taken off his cashmere coat. "I'm leaving you, Sarah." Those 4 words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Richard Remington, the heir to the Remington Steele dynasty, stood near the door, his face a mask of bored indifference. Beside him stood a woman who looked like she had walked out of a magazine spread. She was tall, with hair the color of spun gold, and lips painted a predatory shade of crimson. This was Jessica, his personal assistant, a woman Sarah had once welcomed into their home for holiday parties, a woman she had thought was a friend. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Leaving Richard, we've been married for 5 years. We are building a life." "I am building a life," Richard corrected, his voice smooth and devoid of empathy. "You are merely existing in it. Look at you, Sarah. You wear thrift store cardigans in a penthouse. You embarrass me at galas with your quietness. You aren't a CEO's wife. You're a librarian playing dress-up." Jessica stepped forward, linking her arm through Richard's. Her voice was like syrup laced with arsenic. "Don't make this difficult, sweetie. Richard needs a partner who matches his ambition, someone who can give him a legacy. We both know you haven't been able to give him an heir." The sting of that comment made Sarah gasp. They had been trying, or at least she had. Richard was always away on business trips that, looking at Jessica, now clearly involved more than just mergers and acquisitions. "I have something to tell you," Sarah whispered, her hand tightening over her womb. "Richard, I don't care." He cut her off, tossing a manila envelope onto the coffee table. "These are divorce papers. The prenup is ironclad. You get what you came in with, which is nothing. I'm generous, so I've booked you a motel room for 2 nights. After that, you're on your own." "You can't just throw me out," Sarah cried, tears finally spilling over. "It's freezing outside. I have nowhere to go. My parents are gone. Richard, please." He checked his Rolex, annoyed. "Security will be up in 10 minutes to escort you out. Take whatever fits in 1 suitcase. Anything else stays." Sarah looked into the eyes of the man she had loved since college, the man she had supported when he was just an intern at his father's company, before the money and the power corrupted his soul. There was nothing left in those eyes but greed and arrogance. She didn't tell him. She swallowed the secret fueling a sudden spark of anger deep within her chest. If he wanted her gone, she would go. She would not use her unborn child as a bargaining chip with a monster. 10 minutes later, Sarah walked out of the Remington Tower. The wind bit through her thin coat, stinging her wet cheeks. She dragged a single battered suitcase behind her. As she looked back up at the penthouse, she saw the silhouette of a man and a woman, toasting with champagne glasses against the window. She placed a hand on her stomach. It's just us now, she whispered to the life growing inside her. But I promise you I will die before I let him hurt you. She didn't know it then, but she wasn't carrying just one life. She was carrying two. 5 years went by. They were not kind years, but they were years forged in the fires of survival. Sarah lived in a small, drafty apartment in Queens, nestled above a noisy bakery. The smell of yeast and burnt sugar was a permanent fixture in her life. She worked 2 jobs, one as a night shift transcriptionist for a legal firm, and another stocking shelves at a grocery store in the early mornings. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused and dry. Her eyes had dark circles that makeup couldn't hide, not that she could afford makeup. But the apartment was filled with love. "Mummy, look." I drew a dragon. Leo, with his messy mop of dark hair and eyes that were terrifyingly similar to Richard's, held up a piece of construction paper. Beside him, his twin sister Lily was carefully arranging pebbles she had found in the park. "It's beautiful, Leo," Sarah said, dropping her grocery bags to hug them both. "And Lily, those are the finest diamonds I've ever seen." Lily giggled a sound that made every hour of back-breaking labor worth it. "They're for you, Mummy, so you can be a queen." Sarah's heart ached. They were 5 years old now, intelligent, kind, and inseparable. They knew nothing of Fifth Avenue penthouses or private jets. To them, a treat was a shared chocolate bar on Friday nights. Sarah had kept her location hidden. She used her maiden name, Evans, for everything. She lived in constant fear that Richard would find them, not because he wanted them. He had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her, but because he was a man who viewed people as possessions. Meanwhile, across the river in the glittering heart of Manhattan, life was not as perfect as it appeared in the tabloids. Richard Remington sat in his mahogany office, staring at a medical report. The glass of scotch in his hand trembled slightly. The diagnosis was definitive. Male factor infertility. Severe. Irreversible. He looked up as Jessica entered the room. She was even more glamorous than before, dripping in diamonds, but her face was tight with tension. The press had been asking questions. The Remington legacy was a constant headline. Investors were getting nervous. The board of directors was old-fashioned. They wanted a family man to lead the company into the next generation. Richard's father, the late patriarch, had left a complex will. The control of the family trust, billions of dollars, was contingent on Richard producing a biological heir by his 40th birthday. That birthday was 3 months away. "Well," Jessica snapped, pouring herself a drink. "What did the specialist say? Can we do IVF?" Richard crumpled the report and threw it into the fire. "No." Jessica's glass shattered as she slammed it onto the table. "What do you mean?" "No, Richard. We need a child. If we don't have an heir, your cousin Stefan gets the chair. We lose the house, the jet, the influence. I did not marry a loser." "Watch your tone," Richard growled, though he looked defeated. "I'm sterile, Jessica. It's over." Jessica paced the room like a caged tigress. She hadn't married Richard for love. She had married him to be the Queen of New York. Losing the money was not an option. Suddenly, she stopped. A slow, calculating smile spread across her face. "Wait," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "When you kicked Sarah out, didn't she try to say something?" She was holding her stomach. Richard frowned, searching his memory. She was always dramatic. She was trying to beg for money. Or, Jessica said, her eyes gleaming with malice, she was pregnant. Impossible. We tried for years. She was the problem, not me. Was she? Jessica picked up the fire poker, toying with the ashes. The doctor said you are sterile. But did he say you were always sterile? Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was a recent development. Or maybe she got lucky right before you threw her out. Richard stood up, a flicker of hope and greed lighting up his face. If she had a child, that child is my property. That child is the key to the trust. We need to find her, Jessica commanded. Hire a private investigator. The best money can buy. If that mouse has a child, we are going to take it. We will paint her as an unfit mother, living in squalor. The courts love a wealthy, stable father. Richard smiled a cold, shark-like grin. I'll destroy her all over again. The knock on the door came on a rainy Tuesday. Sarah was in the middle of helping Leo with his reading, while Lily colored in a coloring book. When she heard the heavy, authoritative rap on the wood, her stomach dropped. No one visited them. She peered through the peephole and saw a man in a trench coat holding a thick envelope. Process server. With trembling hands, she opened the door. Sarah Evans, the man asked. Yes, you are served. He thrust the papers into her hands and walked away without looking back. Sarah closed the door and slid down against it, her legs giving way. She tore open the seal. The words swam before her eyes. Legal jargon designed to intimidate and destroy. Custody petition. Plaintiff Richard Remington. Defendant Sarah Evans. Demand for immediate total custody of the minor children. He knew. He knew about the twins. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. How did he find them? She had been so careful. Then she remembered the school registration forms she had filled out last week. It was a public record. His investigators must have been sweeping the system. "Mummy, why are you crying?" Lily asked, tugging on Sarah's sleeve. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes, forcing a smile that felt like it was breaking her face. "I'm not crying, baby. I got some news. We might have to go on a little trip." "A vacation?" Leo asked, his eyes wide. "Sort of," Sarah whispered, pulling them both into a fierce hug. She could smell their shampoo, the scent of innocence she had fought so hard to protect. She had no money for a lawyer. She had no connections. Richard had billions. He had teams of sharks in suits who could turn black into white. The next day, she sat in the cramped office of a legal aid clinic. The lawyer assigned to her was a man named Arthur Higgins. He was older, with a coffee-stained tie and a desk piled high with files. He looked exhausted. "Look, Ms. Evans," Arthur sighed, looking over the papers. "I'll be honest with you. This is bad. Remington has hired the firm of Blackwood and Stone. They don't lose. They are claiming you are indigent, that you live in an unsafe neighborhood, and that you have denied the father his parental rights for 5 years. They are painting you as a kidnapper." "He kicked me out." Sarah slammed her hand on the desk. "He threw me into the street when I was pregnant. He didn't want me, Arthur. He wanted a trophy wife." "I believe you," Arthur said gently. "But the court looks at facts. Can you provide the twins with a private school education, health insurance, a trust fund? Richard Remington can." "He doesn't love them," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "He doesn't even know them. He just wants something. I don't know what, but he uses people." Arthur took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I'll do my best, Sarah, but you need to prepare yourself. We are going to war with a nuclear power, and we have a slingshot." Sarah straightened her spine. She thought of Leo's drawing. She thought of Lily's pebbles. "Then we aim for the eyes, Arthur. I am not losing my children." Back in the penthouse, Jessica was redecorating the guest wing. She was turning it into a nursery, ordering imported Italian cribs and designer clothes. "Are you sure about this?" Richard asked, watching her. "2 kids, they'll be noisy." "We don't need to raise them, Richard," Jessica scoffed. "We have nannies for that. We just need them for the photos, for the board meeting. Once the trust is signed over to you, we can send them to boarding school in Switzerland. We'll be the grieving parents who did their best with troubled children." She picked up a photo of Sarah that the investigator had taken. Sarah looked tired, wearing a faded coat, holding the twins' hands. "Look at her." Jessica laughed. "She's pathetic. She actually thinks she stands a chance. The judge is going to take one look at us and one look at her and hand those kids over before lunch." Richard poured a drink, looking at the photo. "Make sure the press is there, Jessica. I want everyone to see me as the savior rescuing my children from poverty." "Oh, they will," Jessica promised. "The whole world will be watching." The day of the trial, the courthouse steps were swarming with reporters. Flashbulbs popped like lightning as Richard and Jessica descended from their black limousine. Richard wore a navy bespoke suit that cost more than Sarah's annual salary. Jessica wore a modest, cream-colored dress, trying to look maternal, though her diamond earrings were large enough to choke a cat. "Mr. Remington. Mr. Remington, is it true you didn't know you had children?" a reporter shouted. "It is a tragedy," Richard said solemnly, stopping for the cameras. "To find out that my own flesh and blood have been hidden from me, living in poverty, it breaks my heart. I am just here to bring them home." "Mrs. Remington," another reporter called out to Jessica, "are you ready to be a mother?" Jessica dabbed a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. "I have so much love to give. We just want to give those poor angels the life they deserve." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was stifling. Sarah sat on the left wearing her best outfit, a simple grey suit she had bought from a second-hand shop. It was clean and pressed, but against the sea of Armani and Gucci on the other side, she looked small. Arthur Higgins sat beside her, shuffling his papers. He looked nervous. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise. The Honourable Judge Miller presiding." Judge Miller walked in. He was a stern man, with a reputation for being tough but fair. He had grey hair and eyes that seemed to bore into your soul. He sat down and surveyed the room. "We are here for the matter of Remington versus Evans," Judge Miller said. "Custody of minors Leo and Lily Evans." Richard's lead lawyer, a man named Sterling, who looked like a viper in a silk tie, stood up. "Your Honor." Sterling began, his voice smooth and theatrical. "We are here to rectify a grave injustice. For 5 years, my client, a pillar of the community, was denied the knowledge of his children's existence. While he built an empire, Ms. Evans selfishly hid his heirs in a squalid apartment above a bakery. She has denied them proper health care, education, and the stability of a father figure. We are asking for immediate full custody." Arthur stood up, his voice shaking slightly. "Objection. Ms. Evans is a loving, devoted mother who has worked 2 jobs to provide." "Overruled," Judge Miller said, though his tone was neutral. "Save it for the testimony, Mr. Higgins." The trial began. It was a bloodbath. Sterling called witnesses who testified to the dangerous neighborhood Sarah lived in. He produced photos of the bakery's trash cans, making it look like a slum. He called a psychologist paid for by Richard, who had never met the children, but testified that growing up without a father figure caused irreparable psychological damage. Then it was time for Sarah to take the stand. Sterling circled her like a predator. "Ms. Evans," he said, holding up a bank statement. "Is it true that last month you had only $40 in your checking account?" "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "But the rent was paid and the children had food." $40, Sterling repeated, looking at the jury. Though this was a bench trial, he played to the audience. One emergency, one illness, and those children would be on the street. Do you think that is responsible parenting? "I love them," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "I am there for them every night. I read to them. I listen to them. Richard didn't even want me. He kicked me out, so you say." Sterling sneered. "But we have no record of that. We do have records, however, of you fleeing the marital home. Tell me, Ms. Evans, did you ever inform Mr. Remington he was a father?" "I didn't get the chance." "You had 5 years, Sterling shouted. 5 years to pick up a phone. You didn't because you were spiteful. You punished your children to punish him." Sarah looked at Richard. He was checking his watch, looking bored. Jessica was whispering something in his ear and giggling. "I didn't tell him," Sarah said, her voice trembling with rage, "because he is a monster." "Objection," Sterling roared. "The witness is hostile." "Sustained," Judge Miller said, looking at Sarah over his glasses. "Ms. Evans, restrain yourself." The morning session ended with Sarah feeling like she had been run over by a truck. She went to the bathroom to splash water on her face. As she was drying her hands, the door opened and Jessica walked in. Jessica checked her lipstick in the mirror, smiling at Sarah via the reflection. "You look tired, Sarah," Jessica cooed. "Why don't you just give up? We're going to win. You know we are. You can have weekends, maybe, if you behave." Sarah turned to face her. "Why are you doing this, Jessica? You don't want kids. You hate mess. You hate noise." Jessica turned her face, hardening. "I want the life Richard promised me. And those kids are the ticket to the vault. Don't worry, we'll hire the best nannies. They won't bother me. And eventually they'll forget all about you. Kids are resilient like that." Sarah felt a surge of primal protectiveness. "If you touch them," she hissed, "I will kill you." Jessica laughed, a sort of brittle sound. "See, that's exactly the kind of unstable behavior we're going to tell the judge about." She walked out, leaving Sarah shaking with fury. Sarah returned to the courtroom. She felt defeated. But as she sat down, she noticed something. Judge Miller wasn't looking at the lawyers. He was looking at the children, who had been brought in for a brief interview in chambers. Leo was holding Lily's hand, looking terrified. Judge Miller's face softened for a fraction of a second. Then he looked at Richard, and his expression hardened into granite. "Call the next witness," the judge ordered. Sterling smirked. "The defense calls Jessica Remington to the stand." Jessica Remington ascended the witness stand as if she were stepping onto a podium to accept an award for Humanitarian of the Year. She smoothed her cream-colored skirt, crossed her ankles demurely, and offered a shy, trembling smile to the judge. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She had spent the last week rehearsing this exact moment with a team of image consultants. Every blink, every pause, every inflection was choreographed to project one thing: benevolent stability. "Mrs. Remington," Sterling began, his voice soft and reverent, "thank you for being here. I know this is a difficult situation for you." "It is," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked over at the twins who were coloring quietly in the back of the courtroom under the supervision of a bailiff. "My heart just breaks for those children. To think they've been living in such uncertainty." Tell the court, Sterling continued, pacing slowly in front of the jury box, about your relationship with your husband, Richard. Jessica's eyes filled with adoration as she looked at Richard. Richard is a builder. He builds buildings. He builds companies, and he wants nothing more than to build a family. We have been praying for children. We have a nursery ready. We have interviews set up with the best private schools in the city. We just want to give Leo and Lily the world. And what are your feelings toward Miss Evans? Sterling asked, gesturing vaguely toward the defense table where Sarah sat, pale and trembling. Jessica sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. I pity her. Truly I do. She was never quite stable, even back then. She was always imagining things very possessive. When Richard left, it was because he couldn't handle the mood swings anymore. We tried to help her, but she just disappeared. If we had known, if we had only known she was pregnant, we would have stepped in immediately. No child of Richard's should have to sleep above a noisy bakery. Sarah gripped the edge of the table so hard, her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up and shout about the affair, about the cruelty, about the night she was thrown out into the blizzard. But Arthur, her lawyer, placed a heavy hand on her arm, shaking his head. Not yet, his eyes said. Don't let them see you break. Mrs. Remington, Sterling said, moving in for the kill, if the court grants you custody, will you allow Miss Evans to see the children? Jessica paused, appearing to think deeply. We would never want to cut a mother out completely, she said, her tone dripping with faux generosity. But given her financial instability and her history of hiding them, we think supervised visits would be best, maybe once a month, until she gets back on her feet. Thank you, Mrs. Remington. Sterling sat down, looking triumphant. Arthur Higgins stood up. He looked disheveled compared to Sterling, but there was a new glint in his eye. He walked toward the witness stand, holding a notepad. Mrs. Remington, Arthur began, his voice raspy. You mentioned you want to give the children the world. Could you define what that means to you? Jessica blinked, annoyed by the question. Stability, wealth, education, opportunities. And love? Arthur asked. Of course love, she snapped. That goes without saying. Does it? Arthur picked up a piece of paper. I have here a sworn affidavit from a former housekeeper of yours, a Ms. Maria Gonzalez. She worked for you for 3 months last year. She states that you told her, and I quote, I hate children. They are sticky, loud little parasites. I would only ever have one if it secured the trust fund. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jessica's face went rigid. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. That woman was fired for stealing silverware. She is a disgruntled employee, lying for money. Likely money she pointed a manicured finger at Sarah, scraped together. Miss Evans has $40 to her name. Mrs. Remington, Arthur said dryly. She isn't bribing anyone. But let's move on. You claim you didn't know about the pregnancy, yet we have phone records here. Arthur held up a stack of papers. On the night of January the 14th, 5 years ago, the night Ms. Evans was evicted, there was a call placed from your cell phone to a Dr. Aris, a private OBGYN. The call lasted 20 minutes. Why were you calling an obstetrician immediately after Miss Evans was thrown out? Jessica's eyes darted to Richard. Richard sat stoically, but a vein in his temple was throbbing. I don't recall, Jessica stammered. It was 5 years ago. Maybe I was inquiring for myself. For yourself, Arthur pressed. But you just testified that you and Richard have been praying for children recently. Back then you were just his assistant. Were you planning a family with a married man before the divorce papers were even signed?" "Objection!" Sterling roared, jumping to his feet. "Badgering the witness irrelevant." "It goes to credibility, Your Honor," Arthur shouted back. "The witness claims she is a moral paragon who wants to save these children. If she knew about the pregnancy and conspired to hide it, she is not a savior. She is a kidnapper." Judge Miller watched the exchange over the rim of his glasses. He remained terrifyingly silent for a long moment. "Overruled," he said finally. "Answer the question, Mrs. Remington. Did you know Sarah Evans was pregnant?" Jessica gripped the railing of the stand. Her mask was slipping. The perfect mother facade was cracking, revealing the shark beneath. "No," she hissed. "I did not. And even if I did, it doesn't matter. Look at her." She gestured wildly at Sarah. "She's a nobody. She's poor. In this world, money is what protects children. We have billions. She has nothing. That is the only fact that matters." The courtroom went silent. Jessica realized she had shouted. She quickly composed herself, smoothing her hair. "I apologize, Your Honor. I am just passionate about the welfare of these children." "You may step down," Judge Miller said, his voice unreadable. As Jessica walked back to the defense table, she shot a glare at Sarah that was pure venom. She whispered something to Richard, who nodded curtly. They still thought they had won. After all, the law usually favored the gold, not the heart. The afternoon dragged on. Sterling called a financial expert who projected charts showing how much better the twins' lives would be with the Remington fortune. He showed photos of the private jet, the Aspen ski lodge, the Hamptons estate. It was a dazzling display of wealth designed to make Sarah's two-bedroom apartment look like a dungeon. Sarah felt her hope draining away. The world was so big, and Richard was so powerful. How could she fight this? She looked at Leo and Lily. Leo was asleep on a bench, his head in Lily's lap. Lily was stroking his hair, humming a song Sarah sang to them at night. They were her entire universe. If she lost them, she would cease to exist. "Mummy," Lily whispered loudly as the court took a brief recess. "I want to go home. I don't like the man with the scary eyes." She pointed at Richard. Richard heard it. He turned around and looked at his daughter. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, curiosity. But then Jessica placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering about the board meeting, the legacy, the power. The flicker died, replaced by cold resolve. "Soon, sweetie," Richard said to Lily, his voice stiff. "You'll be coming to a much bigger house. You'll have ponies." "I don't want ponies," Lily said defiantly. "I want Mommy." Richard turned away, dismissing her. To him, she wasn't a person with desires. She was an asset to be acquired. Finally, closing arguments were made. Sterling gave a soaring speech about birthright and destiny. Arthur gave a heartfelt plea about maternal bond and continuity of care. Judge Miller gathered his papers. He looked tired. "I will review the evidence and issue my ruling tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned." That night was the longest of Sarah's life. She couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed at the motel Arthur had paid for, with Leo and Lily curled up on either side of her. She memorized the rhythm of their breathing. She memorized the way Leo's nose crinkled when he dreamt. She memorized the warmth of Lily's small hand in hers. "Please," she prayed to the darkness. "Please don't take them. Take everything else. Take my life. But don't take them." Across town in the penthouse, the mood was celebratory. Jessica had ordered champagne. "We crushed her." Jessica laughed, clinking her glass against Richard's. "Did you see her face?" "She knows it's over. The judge is an old-school traditionalist. He respects the Remington name. By tomorrow noon, those brats will be ours. The trust will be unlocked, and we will be the kings of New York." Richard stared out the window at the city lights. "They look like me," he murmured. "Who cares?" Jessica waved a hand dismissively. "What matters is that the DNA test confirmed it. They are the keys to the kingdom. Once the money is transferred, we can hire that Swiss nanny. You won't even have to see them if you don't want to." Richard took a long sip of his drink. He drowned the small voice of conscience that sounded like his daughter. He was a Remington. Winning was all that mattered. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Word had spread that the billionaire twins case was concluding. The gallery was filled with onlookers, reporters, and curious legal clerks. The air was thick with anticipation, smelling of floor wax and nervous sweat. Sarah sat at her table, her eyes red-rimmed. She held a rosary in her pocket, her fingers working the beads so hard they left indentations in her skin. Arthur sat beside her, looking grim. He had done his best, but against the weight of the Remington fortune, his best felt inadequate. Richard and Jessica looked radiant. Jessica wore a soft pink suit, projecting an image of victory. Richard checked his watch repeatedly, eager to get this over with and get back to the office. "All rise," the bailiff boomed. Judge Miller entered. He did not look at the lawyers. He did not look at the gallery. He carried a thick folder in his hands, which he placed deliberately on the bench. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and folded his hands. Usually a judge would begin by summarizing the arguments. Judge Miller did not. "Before I issue my ruling on custody," Judge Miller said, his voice booming through the silent room, "there is a matter of evidence that came to my attention late last night." Sterling frowned. "Your Honor." "We submitted all evidence during discovery." "Not this evidence," Judge Miller said. He picked up a large, sealed brown envelope. "This was delivered to my chambers by a courier from the firm of Halloway and Sons, the executors of the late Archibald Remington's estate." Richard stiffened. Archibald was his father. He had been dead for 6 years. Halloway and Sons were the family's oldest, most trusted lawyers, men who operated in the shadows. "Mr. Remington," Judge Miller said, fixing Richard with a stare that could freeze lava, "you petitioned this court for custody based on the premise that these children are your biological heirs and thus essential to the release of the family trust." "That is correct, Your Honor," Sterling answered for him. "The DNA test confirmed paternity, 99.9%. "Indeed," the judge said. "The children are yours. Biology is not in question." Sarah felt a wave of nausea. This was it. He was acknowledging the claim. "However," the judge continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous, "the trust deed you submitted to this court, the one granting you control upon the production of an heir, was an amended version, dated 2018. "Yes, Your Honor," Sterling said, looking confused. "It seems," Judge Miller said, opening the folder, "that your father, Archibald Remington, had a distinct lack of faith in your character, Mr. Remington. 3 days before he died, he filed a codicil, a final addition to the will with Halloway and Sons. It was sealed only to be opened in the event that you appeared in court, claiming an heir that you had not raised from birth." The room went deathly silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Jessica's smile faltered. "My father was senile," Richard blurted out, standing up. "Whatever he wrote, sit down." Judge Miller slammed his gavel. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "You will be silent." Richard sank back into his chair, his face paling. Judge Miller put on his reading glasses. The codicil reads as follows: "I, Archibald Remington, fearing that my son Richard's greed outweighs his humanity, hereby decree, if my son Richard divorces his wife, Sarah, and if it is discovered that he has abandoned any biological children born of that union, the following penalty is immediately enacted." The judge paused. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time his eyes were kind. "The penalty, the judge read, is the immediate and total forfeiture of Richard Remington's status as beneficiary. He is to be stripped of all titles, all shares, and all access to the Remington accounts." Jessica gasped. It was a sharp, strangled sound. "What?" she whispered. "Furthermore," the judge continued, his voice ringing out like a bell of judgment, "the entire Remington estate, valued at approximately $4.2 billion, shall be placed immediately into a trust for the grandchildren, Leo and Lily Evans." A murmur of shock swept through the gallery. "But that's not the end," Judge Miller said, raising a hand. "The codicil specifies the trustee. Control of the trust and the monthly stipend of $50,000 for living expenses, plus the residence at Fifth Avenue, shall be granted to the sole guardian of the children." Judge Miller looked at Richard. "The codicil defines guardian as the parent who did not abandon the children." The realization hit the room like a physical wave. Sterling was flipping through his papers frantically. "Your Honor, this is ambuscade. We haven't seen this document." "It was certified and notarized," Judge Miller said. "It is ironclad. Mr. Remington, by chasing these children for the money, you have triggered the very clause that loses you the money." The judge turned his gaze to Sarah. "Ms. Evans, the law in this courtroom is usually blind, but your father-in-law was not. He saw you. He saw your character, and he saw his son's lack thereof. So," the judge concluded, leaning forward, "my ruling is as follows. Sole legal and physical custody of Leo and Lily Evans is awarded to the mother, Sarah Evans. Furthermore, per the terms of the Archibald Remington Trust, Sarah Evans is hereby named the executor of the estate on behalf of the minors." Richard sat frozen. His world was disintegrating. The skyscrapers, the jets, the power, it was all dissolving into smoke. He had played the game for the highest stakes, and he had lost everything because of his own arrogance. But it wasn't Richard who broke. It was Jessica. The realization that the billions were gone, that the man sitting next to her was no longer a king, but a pauper with a famous last name, hit her like a physical blow. She had schemed for 6 years. She had lied, cheated, and destroyed a marriage, all for the payout, and now the woman she had mocked, the mouse, in the thrift store coat, was the most powerful woman in the room. Jessica stood up. Her face was contorted, ugly with rage and disbelief. Her hands clawed at the air. "No!" The scream tore from her throat, raw and animalistic. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was the shriek of a demon exorcised. "No. That's my money. We earned it. He promised me." She turned on Richard, pounding her fists on his chest. "You idiot! You sterile, useless idiot! You told me it was secure. You told me we would win. Order, order!" The judge banged his gavel. "Bailiff, restrain that woman. It's mine!" Jessica screamed, her voice cracking as the bailiffs grabbed her arms. She kicked and thrashed her perfect hair, coming undone, her makeup smearing. She looked at Sarah, her eyes bulging. "You witch!" You planned this. You knew. Sarah stood up slowly. She was still trembling, but not from fear anymore. She held Leo and Lily close to her legs. She looked at the woman who had tormented her for years, the woman who was now being dragged out of the courtroom, screaming like a banshee. I didn't plan anything, Jessica. Sarah said, her voice quiet, but carrying through the stunned silence. I just loved my children. That's the one thing you never accounted for. Jessica was hauled out the double doors, her screams fading into the hallway. I want my money. I want my lawyer, Richard. Do something. But Richard did nothing. He stared at the table, his head in his hands. He was utterly alone. Judge Miller looked down at Richard. Mr. Remington, in light of the fraud you attempted to perpetrate on this court regarding your knowledge of the children and the financial disclosures you falsified, I am holding you in contempt. You will be taken into custody immediately. Richard looked up, his eyes hollow. Custody? You wanted to go to court, Mr. Remington, the judge said icily. Now you are going to jail. Two officers stepped forward and pulled Richard's hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. As he was led away, he passed Sarah. He stopped for a second. Sarah, he croaked. Sarah looked at him. She saw the man she had once loved, now a shell consumed by his own greed. She felt no hate, only a profound, heavy pity. Goodbye, Richard, she said softly. He was led away. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. Ms. Evans. Ms. Evans. How does it feel to be the richest woman in New York? Ms. Evans. Will you move back into the penthouse? Arthur. Higgins slumped into his chair, laughing in disbelief. I have never, he wheezed, wiping his forehead, in 40 years of law, seen anything like that. Sarah didn't answer the reporters. She knelt down to the eye level of her children. The billions of dollars meant nothing. The penthouse meant nothing. Mommy, Leo asked, looking at the door where his father had been taken. Is the bad man gone? Yes, baby, Sarah said, tears finally streaming down her face. Tears of relief, of release, of freedom. The bad man is gone, and he can never hurt us again. Can we go home now? Lily asked. I want to finish my coloring. Sarah laughed, a wet, choking sound of joy. Yes, we can go home. We can go anywhere we want. But the story wasn't quite over. Sarah Evans had won the war, but now she had to navigate the peace. And there was one more surprise waiting for her inside the envelope the judge had handed to Arthur. The chaos of the courthouse faded as Arthur Higgins closed the heavy oak door of the judge's chambers. He had been granted permission to use the room for a few moments to let Sarah compose herself before facing the media shark tank outside. Sarah sat in a leather chair that felt too big for her. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her trembling. Leo and Lily were sitting on the floor, happily playing with a box of paper clips the bailiff had given them. They had no idea that their net worth now exceeded the GDP of a small country. They just knew the shouting was over. Sarah, Arthur said gently, sitting opposite her. He placed the brown envelope on the table. The judge gave this to me. He said Archibald wanted you to read it when the dust settled. It's a personal letter. Sarah reached out her fingers, brushing the expensive stationery. She broke the wax seal. The handwriting was shaky, but firm. The script of a man running out of time, but not out of clarity. My dearest Sarah, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means my son has failed the final test, and you have survived the fire. I am sorry I cannot be there to see you triumph, but I am writing this to ask for your forgiveness. I knew Sarah. I knew how he treated you. I saw the way he looked at his assistant, and I saw the way he looked through you. I was an old man, dying and weak, and I couldn't stop him then. But I could ensure that his greed would eventually be his undoing. I knew you were pregnant before I died. I saw you holding your stomach at the funeral. Richard was too busy networking to notice, but a grandfather knows. I didn't say anything, because I knew he would use the child as a pawn. I had to let you leave to keep the baby safe. It was the hardest decision of my life. This money was never meant for Richard. It was built by hard work, not by manipulation. It belongs to someone who knows the value of $1 and the value of a heart. That person is you. Raise my grandchildren to be kind. Raise them to be strong. And please tell them their grandfather loved them before he ever met them. Yours, Archibald Remington. Tears fell from Sarah's eyes, splashing onto the paper. She pressed the letter to her chest. For 5 years, she thought she had been entirely alone. But the old man, the stern patriarch, she had been too intimidated to speak to, had been her silent guardian angel all along. He knew, she whispered. Arthur. He knew everything. Arthur smiled a genuine, crinkly-eyed smile. He was a sharp man, Archibald. He played the long game, and he bet on the right horse. Arthur cleared his throat. Now, regarding the logistics, the firm of Halloway & Sons has already reached out. They are preparing the transfer. The penthouse is yours, obviously, but the press is camped out there. I suggest we move you to a hotel for a few days, get you some security. Sarah looked at the twins. No penthouse, she said firmly. Arthur paused. Sarah, it's a $20 million property. It's a museum of cold memories, she said. Sell it. Sell the furniture. Sell the art. Take the money and put it into the trust for the kids. I don't want to live in the place where my heart was broken. Then where will you go? Sarah thought about the small, drafty apartment over the bakery. It was cramped, yes, but it was warm. We'll find a house, she said. A real house, with a backyard for a dog. Somewhere where the neighbors know each other's names. Somewhere normal. The Fall of the King. While Sarah was planning a future of normalcy, Richard Remington was experiencing a reality that was anything but. He was being processed at the central booking station. His bespoke suit was replaced by an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. His Rolex, his phone, his identity all stripped away and placed in a plastic bag. He was placed in a holding cell with 3 other men. The air smelled of bleach and despair. There were no leather chairs here, no assistants to bring him coffee. He sat on the metal bench staring at the concrete floor. The magnitude of his error was crushing him. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that his father had seen right through him. Archibald had set a trap, and Richard, blinded by arrogance, had walked right into it. He thought of Jessica. He thought of how quickly she had turned on him. The moment the money vanished, her love evaporated like mist. He realized with a sickening jolt that Sarah was the only person who had ever actually loved him for himself. When he was just a junior executive, when he was stressed and unsure, she had been there with tea and encouragement, and he had thrown her away for a mirage. "Hey, Suit," one of the cellmates grunted. "What are you in for?" Richard looked up. "I lost my family." The man laughed. "Join the club, pal." Richard closed his eyes. He would have years to think about it. The fraud charges were serious. He was facing 5 to 10 years. And when he got out, he would be a middle-aged felon with no fortune, no friends, and 2 children who would likely never speak to him again. The fate of the serpent. Jessica's fall was less legal, but socially it was a guillotine. She wasn't arrested, but she was ruined. The video of her screaming in court, the mistress meltdown, went viral within hours. It was everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, the nightly news. Her face contorted in greed and rage became a meme. "It's my money" became a catchphrase for entitlement. She tried to return to her apartment, but the locks had been changed. Richard had paid for it, and the assets were frozen. She went to her friends, the high society women she had lunched with, the ones she had gossiped with about Sarah's dowdy clothes. They didn't open their doors. They blocked her number. In their world, losing money was a sin, but public embarrassment was a capital offense. Jessica was radioactive. She ended up moving back to her hometown in Ohio, living in her mother's basement. She spent her days scouring the internet, reading comments about herself stewing in bitterness. She tried to write a tell-all book, but no publisher would touch it. They didn't want the story of the villain, they wanted the story of the hero. Jessica had spent her life trying to upgrade to climb the ladder by stepping on others. She fell off the top rung and hit every step on the way down. 6 months later, the house was yellow. It had a white porch and a big oak tree in the front yard. It was in a quiet suburb in Connecticut, far away from the prying eyes of Manhattan. Sarah sat on the porch swing, drinking a cup of tea. It was a Saturday. The air smelled of cut grass and blooming lilacs. In the yard, Leo and Lily were chasing a golden retriever puppy named Barnaby. Their laughter rang out, clear and unburdened. They were attending a local school, making friends who liked them for their jokes, not their trust funds. A car pulled up the driveway. It was Arthur. He visited every other weekend, technically to discuss the estate, but mostly because he had become a surrogate grandfather to the twins. "Afternoon, Executor Evans," Arthur joked, walking up the steps with a box of donuts. "Afternoon, Arthur." Sarah smiled. "I told you to call me Sarah." "Old habits?" Arthur sat down on the swing beside her. "I have the quarterly reports for the foundation." Sarah nodded. This was her project. She hadn't kept the billions for herself. She had set up the Remington Evans Foundation. Its mission was specific, providing legal aid housing and job training for single mothers facing eviction. "We approved 50 grants this month," Arthur said, opening a folder. 50 women who won't have to sleep in shelters, 50 children who will stay in their schools. Sarah looked at the photos attached to the files. Women who looked tired, scared, just like she had been. "It's good work," Sarah said softly. "It's the only way to clean the money, to make it mean something." "You're a good woman, Sarah," Arthur said. "Most people would have bought a yacht. I have everything I need right here." She gestured to the yard where Leo had just tripped over the puppy and was rolling in the grass, giggling. "Have you heard from him?" Arthur asked cautiously. "Richard." Sarah looked at her tea. "He sent a letter from prison. He wanted to apologize. He said he found God." "Do you believe him?" "I don't think it matters," Sarah said. "I'm not angry anymore, Arthur. Anger is too heavy to carry. I just want him to be a lesson to the kids, a lesson about what happens when you love things more than people." "And the mistress disappeared," Sarah said. "Someone told me she's working at a mall in Ohio. I hope she finds peace, but she'll never find it in a wallet." The sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the lawn. The twins ran up to the porch, breathless and flushed. "Mummy, Arthur." "Did you see Barnaby almost caught a squirrel?" Leo shouted. "He's a hunter," Lily agreed. Sarah pulled them both into a hug, not caring about the grass stains on their knees. She breathed in the scent of sunshine and dirt. They were safe. They were happy. And they were hers. She thought back to that cold night outside the Remington Tower 5 years ago. She remembered the fear, the biting wind, the feeling of total abandonment. She had whispered a promise to her unborn children, "Then I will die before I let him hurt you." She hadn't died. She had lived. She had fought. And she had won. "Who wants dinner?" Sarah asked, standing up. "I'm making roast chicken." "With rosemary?" Leo asked. Sarah paused. It used to be Richard's favorite, but she reclaimed it. It was her recipe after all. "Yes," she smiled, "with extra rosemary, just for us." As they walked into the warm yellow house, the ghost of the poor wife who stood in the snow faded away, replaced by the woman who built a kingdom out of love. And in the end, that was the only legacy that truly mattered. And there you have it. The story of Sarah Evans is a powerful reminder that the truth always has a way of coming to light. Richard and Jessica thought that money was the ultimate power, but they forgot that character is the ultimate currency. In the end, a grandfather's secret letter and a mother's undying love toppled an empire of greed. Sarah didn't just win a court case. She won her life back, proving that while you can inherit billions, you cannot buy loyalty, and you certainly cannot buy the love of a family. Justice wasn't just served in that courtroom. It was poetic. What did you think of Judge Miller's surprise ruling? Do you think Richard deserved a second chance, or was his punishment exactly what he needed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, or if you just love seeing justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have plenty more tales of betrayal, resilience, and shocking twists coming your way. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that the good guys do win sometimes. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.